Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome all. Good evening to every single person out there, far and wide, wherever you may be tuning in from, and this goes for even after this live stream. I'm hoping that we get a number of folks to get eyes on this because this is probably going to be the most in-depth live stream we've ever done on this channel, and we're going against the grain today because we are not going to talk severe weather. We're not going to talk tornadoes. We're not going to talk what's going on in the plains. We are strictly going to talk the hurricane season. That's it. Today is officially May 1st, 2024, which means we are now in the final, we'll say 30 days, because it is the back end of the day, obviously, of May 1st. There's 31 days in the month of May. We are now on the back end of May. So we are in that home stretch. Like I said in a previous live stream before, we were at, third base, and we can see home plate, and we're on our way there. So I have the thumbnail up in front of you guys. Hurricane season, what we know. Now, I'll let you know in advance. I apologize. This is going to be a very, very long-winded live stream, so be prepared. Please try to hold your questions to the end. I will have an open discussion, open forum at the end, but I promise you, when I say that there is a ton of information that I want to get through tonight, it's best if we hold questions and comments and concerns to the end, and I promise you I will work hard to address them. A little bit of a schedule of events. Tonight we're going to be talking about a whole lot. We're going to be looking at African climatology. We're going to be looking at other influences across the planet. We're going to be looking at the Saharan dust layer. We're going to be looking at the intensity forecasts of our storms. We're going to be looking at SSTs, deep ocean heat content, the ENSO, the MJO, the PDO, the NAO, the AMM, everything that you could possibly think of. We're even going to go as far as to think sun angle. We're going to talk sun angle, ITCZ, every little bit of information that we possibly can. And I'm going to throw this disclaimer out there, and I don't say this from a negative standpoint. It's just some people, they don't want to hear the speculative facts. And the reason I say speculative is because it's not going to be fact. It's not going to be cold, hard facts because we're not there yet. But what I'm going to do is exactly what I've been trained to do. We're going to look at all the data. We're going to look at analysis data. We're going to look at observed data. We're also going to look at forecast data. And we're going to come to a consensus, and we're going to start looking at potential impact zones and kind of more or less predicting where it is we could likely see our storms collide, where it is our threat zones are going to be more than likely. And we'll talk preparedness at the very tail end of this. At the end, I have a list that I unfortunately could not get put into a PowerPoint presentation, but I have a huge list for you guys of all things preparedness that we're going to go over. This is the back page, this is the second page, and we're going to cover everything from X, Y, and Z. So before we begin, we'll say hello to everybody. If you're on TikTok joining me tonight, thank you very much for taking some time out of your evening. We're not talking severe weather. We're going to do a full-fledged, bona fide package into a nice box and just send it off, or a message in a bottle, if you will, and throw it into the ocean, and we're going to wait and see what happens because we're approaching home base. Ladies and gentlemen on YouTube, thank you very much for joining me. Sabrina, Kevin, Jay, PM, Super Charas, Scrooge McDuck. Who else do we have? Maddie, welcome in. CWTDF, how's it going? Good to see you. Wave Hype Nomad, Cat4, Young Alchemy, thank you very much for coming back in. Carson Dobler, Chris Mazel, Saltwater Pool, everybody who's joining us this evening. Let's go ahead. Let's get started. Let's get this underway. So, right out of the gate, and let me see if I can go ahead and change over my my TikTok so we can see what it is that we're talking about here. Let me see. Give me 1 second. Bear with me. I'm going to switch over the information here so we can actually, if you guys can actually see what's going on. Let's see. How am I going to facilitate this now? This is going to be a bit of a struggle. This is, once again, why I encourage... All right, so we'll go over statistical stuff first, and then I'll hold you guys up to the screen, I promise. So what we're looking at here is the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, where Colorado State University uploads all of their tropical forecasts. And what we're going to do is start off by simply looking at our preliminary predictions tonight. So let's head on in there, shall we? We're going to go to seasonal predictions, and let's take a look starting from the top. So what I love about this website, and it was recently introduced to me by Atlantic Hurricane Watch on Instagram. Him and I have been, them and I'm not going to assume, we've been talking back and forth quite a bit extensively about the hurricane season up and coming and kind of more or less throwing theories and ideas back and forth between one another. So what we're looking at here, first and foremost, I'm going to switch this over. We're going to go to just named storms so we can take a look at all the different anomalies, all the different entities out there who are spitting out forecasts. And for my folks in TikTok, I'm going to list them off so you guys can hear me. So first and foremost, we have 268th Weather. This is a privatized sector. They have 27 predicted named storms. We go over to Weather 2020, 17 named storms. We go to Atmospheric G2, 24 predicted storms. DTN, 25. Pennsylvania University, Penn State, 33 predicted storms. We go over to the University of Missouri, 26. The University of Arizona, I was a student with them for a little while, 21 predicted storms, which is what we predicted here in the Weather Center. TSR, Tropical Storm Risk, 23 predicted. NMME, which is our North American Multi-Model Ensemble, has 21 storms so far predicted for the 2024 hurricane season. Weather Bell, going in, 28 predicted. I think they revised. Oh, no, they didn't revise it. Sorry. They still have the threshold of 25 to 30 named storms with an average 28 expected. ECMWF, which we'll dive into a little bit here later on down the road. We have 21 predicted by the Euro. We will get an update on that model on the 7th. We will see what the new information proposes to us, and it'll actually forecast past, I believe, October, because right now our data stops at the month of October. So that's why we're only at 21. So don't be surprised if that number goes up another 1, 2, possibly 3 as we start finally getting data through the back end of the hurricane season. As we're all very well aware of, 23 predicted storms with an average percentile or a margin of error of 19 to 27 brought to us by Colorado State University. GWO predicting 20. AccuWeather going for 23 with an average margin of error of 20 to 25. Weather Tiger is predicting 22 named storms between an average margin of error of 20 to 24. And then Storm Geo has a total of 21 named storms. And since he is a rather big entity in weather, I'll go ahead and mention that Ryan Hall today released his preliminary forecast and is going for 25 named storms. And that's what we've got so far. If we come on over to our Colorado State University, these are impact probabilities. And we're going to deep dive into all this very heavily. So Alabama, and we're going to go through, guys, like I said, fasten your seatbelts. We are talking big time tonight, and we're going to dive into every single piece of information that we can. I don't know if you guys watching on YouTube can see just how many tabs I have open right now. So Alabama, 78% risk of a named storm impact. Baldwin, Alabama, 60%. Mobile, Alabama, right there on the coast, 56%. If we scroll down a little bit, Florida with a whopping 96% chance of a named storm impact, following that up with a 75% chance of a hurricane landfall for this hurricane season, and I am fully on board with that. In fact, my gut tells me we will have 2, possibly 3 storms hitting us this year, and I'll definitely dive into the science. I'm going to back that accusation, or I'm going to back that claim up. I'm not going to just let you out to dry. I'm going to back that claim up as we get further into this briefing, with an average probability of named storm impact being around an 86% chance. Florida has a 29% chance of a major hurricane impact this year, which is definitely scary to think about. Another top contender comes in with the state of, Georgia. 82% chance of a forecast named storm probability. Now, hear me out. There is a bit of a caveat to that. Georgia, you're not looking at the potential, at least in my best opinion, my most professional opinion, we're not looking at a possible storm making landfall along the coast of Georgia. What will likely end up happening is something we see traditional for most of the hurricane seasons. They'll either make landfall somewhere to the south, or they'll come across from the Gulf Coast and move off towards the northeast, and that's how you'll get your named storm impact. I don't really think we have the ingredients necessary to get a named storm in that general area, but we shall see. Obviously, things do change. Louisiana, Mike, shout out to you. He's not in here right now. He told me on Instagram he has baseball tonight with his kids, so he's not going to be tuning in tonight. But Louisiana, 84% chance of seeing a named storm impact this year. Then, let's see, where else do we go? Maddie, if you're still in the chat, you could see that a large majority of our northeastern states are at about that 20 to 30 percentile risk of a landfall. Mississippi, 72% chance of a named storm impact. And then we're finally starting to dwindle the table a little bit. North Carolina, I can't forget our mid-Atlantic states. I do apologize for that. North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, you have about an 85% chance of seeing a landfall this year. And again, I actually do fully agree with that. We'll go ahead and break down the science behind it and why it is I'm picking up what CSU is putting down 110% with all the homework I've been doing in the background. South Carolina, 76% chance of a named storm landfall. Texas, 80% chance. Once again, I will back that up later into the briefing. Let's see, are there any other big ones that jump out? Virginia, 65% chance. That's still our mid-Atlantic region. Canada, believe it or not, 70% chance of seeing a named storm impact this year. Nova Scotia, 61% chance. Quintana Roo, 82%. We're getting into our islands and whatnot now, by the way, islands in Central America. Unfortunately, the Bahamas are sitting at a whopping 94% chance of seeing a named storm impact, which is terrifying, to tell you the truth, because the Bahamas remained completely unscathed last year. But all right, let's go ahead and switch gears. We're going to get started, and we're going to fully get ourselves immersed into this information. TikTok is dwindling. I'm thinking about ending the live stream on TikTok because we've lost a lot of our viewers on there. I think they were preparing for a severe weather discussion, and unfortunately, I'm not doing it tonight. Severe weather, we're on the back end of severe weather out there. So we'll go ahead and we'll lean on my update there for that information. And then maybe we'll talk about it at the very back end of this, but I really don't think we're going to have time. So what we're looking at here is going to be a breakdown of our African easterly jet, okay? And we already have signs that this is going to start to form. Our European and our GFS models are actually already indicating at 500 and 300 millibars that our easterly jet is beginning to establish itself. So the climate models could be onto something in terms of activating our MDR as early as July. Could even be late June. We could start to see our African wave train begin to set up out there, which is very interesting to say the least. For my TikTok viewers, we're dropping big time. We're at 9 viewers on TikTok right now. We were up to over 100 a little while ago, so I'm just going to leave you guys as is. If you have questions, hold off till the end, and I'll get to you guys. So the African easterly jet is what is primarily responsible for a lot of our activity out there. And as you can see, this is what I really wanted us to pay close attention to, these mesoscale convective vortices. And essentially, in layman's terms, these are our tropical waves, or our African easterly waves. And essentially, what all this means is you can more or less tell if you are going to have a developing tropical wave out there by the time they exit off the African coast, and even before that, you can tell just by looking at an 850 to 650 millibar chart, looking at the contour gradient pattern, the streamlines associated with it, as well as the vorticity, especially in the mid-levels that are associated with it, as to whether or not they're going to develop. And as you can see here, confined to mid-levels with little or no signature at the surface, which is exactly what we just highlighted. Dynamically stable, multiple convective cycles. Now, they start off as mesoscale convective systems, MCSs, as they travel over Africa. They'll pop up just as we typically see our severe weather pop up here in the United States, although we're obviously not used to them traveling westward. We're used to seeing them traveling eastward here in the mid-portions of the northern hemisphere. Right along the equator, however, we have our easterly trade winds that come across Africa, as well as our upper-level easterly jet that helps them propagate with that easterly flow headed in the westward direction. So right here, why do we care about MCVs? They often emerge over warm waters with convection, systems preconditions for successful genesis. These are the ones where you can identify using windy.com or whatever method you like to look at, taking a look at our 850 millibar flow, which ones will actually try to ride that ITCZ, develop that really good cyclonic curvature in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, which is what I'm trying to draw and signify with my hands here. I'm not dancing, I promise. And you'll be able to tell which ones are going to try to move poleward. And we're also going to talk about that as well, because I've been seeing a lot of folks mentioning that these storms, if they rapidly intensify, they're going to go out to sea. And I'll tell you right now, and for those of you who joined my Instagram live earlier today, I made a funny reference to how I look at storms trying to escape to the north. Let's say we'll use Weather Center here. We'll use David as an example. And like I said, for Valerie and Alchemy, you guys tuned in earlier today, so you already know the metaphor, the example I'm going to use. First and foremost, I work out on a regular basis. I'm not the world's strongest man. I don't consider myself a very strong individual. Like, yes, I can do this, and yes, I can bench that, squat this, whatever. We're not going to talk numbers. If I go to walk through a doorway and the door is open, naturally, what's going to happen? You're going to walk through it. If you need to get inside of a store and the doors are open and it's open for business, the doors are going to slide open and you're going to walk through. Very simple. Same premise for a hurricane. Now let's go ahead and change the metaphor a little bit and say, let's go ahead and talk Walmart. They're no longer 24/7. They stopped at a 24/7 hours as of COVID, and they're no longer the case. So if you try to go in at 2 a.m. in the morning, those doors are not going to open. So what's going to happen if you try to walk through those doors? You're going to bounce right off of them, right? You're not going to be able to go through. I mean, unless you're Jason Voorhees, but that's a whole other thing in itself. What I'm trying to say here is if we have dominant subtropical ridging across the Atlantic and a very, very prevailing high pressure across the Azores and the Bermuda area, those strong hurricanes are only going to be able to move so far to the north in latitude before those prevailing winds on the south side of it continue to drive them in a more zonal pattern. And we'll talk about that. I have notes here. Basically, if the door is open, they're going to walk through it. If the door is closed, they're not going to. Hurricanes, as they rapidly intensify, are not just going to naturally carve a path in whichever direction they want. If that were the case, there'd be absolutely no skill forecasting these storms. We would have no idea where they're going. We'd have no use of our forecast models. We'd have no use of the cone, etc. So that's the big thing in a nutshell. And as you can see here, when you start to really see the robust activity forming up, this is our 850 millibar level. You can see the huge cyclonic curvature here. At 500 millibars, we start to get that closed low cyclone. And then at 300 millibars or 250 millibars, as it breaks away from our ITCZ, you can really see an established low center of circulation. So that's all I wanted to get into in terms of our African easterly jet. This is another look at what it is that they look like, or what they look like as they're traveling over Africa and then off the coastline. It is very, very natural, and I learned this recently. I did not know this before. I used to always look at it as, oh yeah, that's a powerful tropical wave, and when that convective burst ended, oh, it's weakening. That's not how it works, actually. It's a totally normal process. That's actually what also helps to stir the pot in terms of our Saharan air layer out there in Africa. It's when we have a very robust African easterly jet and all this convection occurring over inland portions of the African continent that create the outflow boundaries that are actually responsible for our severe weather in the Great Plains right now. And it creates those cold pools that end up stirring up the dust and kicking it off the coast because they get lifted up into the mid-levels, and then that's when our prevailing easterlies carry that stuff off the coastline. And we'll look at that as well. We have the models pulled up. We have the climatology on that pulled up. So, as you can see, a recent survey of convective bursts. 80% of tropical cyclones have at least one burst. 70% of tropical cyclones intensify after a burst. So, what that means is, believe it or not, as they recycle their thunderstorm activity in those easterly waves, as they begin to develop depression-style characteristics and so on and so forth, you are going to see the recycling of the thunderstorms. You're not going to have a totally concise, perfect wave. You're not going to have a perfect depression. You're not going to have a perfect tropical storm. There's other indications like more consistent tropical convective bursting, but in this case, you're going to see that ebbing and flowing, and I need to work hard on not falling pit into, oh, shoot, it's weakening, or oh, we're losing it, or oh, that doesn't look very impressive, because it's actually a total natural life cycle. The heck? Okay, that didn't work. Whatever, I guess I don't have water. So now let's move on. We're going to look at our African easterly jets. So that we have here are our 500 millibar winds. And this is where we stand currently. This is earlier in the day. This is our 12Z European model. And notice that we still have westerly winds over the northern apex of Africa, moving across the Middle East and the southern periphery of Europe that's just outside of the northern portion of the chart. Now, I want you to watch right in through here. So our ITCZ, you can clearly see it. And what's interesting is this is this is 500 millibars, so it makes a heck of a lot of sense that we have difluent flow right over the ITCZ, because as the name implies, the intertropical convergence zone, down towards the equator, you have all that convergent wind flow, and as a result, that mass has to go somewhere. If you have colliding winds down at the surface, they're going to go up and then diffuse up in the upper level. So here's your ITCZ, and I want you to watch the wind flow across the heart of Africa as we take this through time. Notice that we finally start to develop areas of subtropical high height centers over the northern portions of the state, and we're finally starting to develop our low height centers over the southern half of the continent, and see that subtle acceleration in our winds. So we're going to start to see our African easterly jet and maybe some very weak MCSs off the African coast coming on in. So as you can see, at 500 millibars, this is now valid for 12 Zulu on May 11th, our easterly jet is finally starting to make its presence known, and this is kind of more or less the slow ignition of the tropical Atlantic season. The reason I say tropical Atlantic is because that's what starts our convection. That's starting the motor, and it's going to get everything circulating. It's going to oil the cogs, oil the rods, the connecting portions, the pistons, the valves, whatever you want to describe, get that picture in your mind. This is getting that combustion engine started up. And if you switch over here, this is actually going to be our integrated vapor transport. This is at the highest portions of the atmosphere. I should say this is a whole three-dimensional column of the atmosphere, and this is going to further reinforce what it is that we're talking about. So as you go through time, notice that a lot of our moisture is down to the south, off the coast over the Indian Ocean, over the Persian Gulf area more or less, and off towards the Atlantic where our ITCZ is. And notice how our streamlines are different now. Our streamlines are actually converging because these are our low-level winds mixing in with our upper level. As I mentioned, this is a three-dimensional cross-section in a, I guess you can say, 2D chart. And as you go through time, notice that easterly jet is really starting to wake up. You're really starting to see that vapor transport going across Africa, west to east, or I should say east to west. Pardon me, I'm so used to looking at the United States at this point. So our jet is going to start to activate, and we're going to start seeing a lot more moisture being transported across the greater Atlantic into the Caribbean Ocean. So we already have our signs that the tropical Atlantic is going to start to wake up. Now, here's the elephant in the room. We're going to go ahead and look at what our anomalies are looking at. Now, I've noticed that in most recent days, a lot of our climatology models are thinking that we're not going to have as aggressive of a La Nina kick into play, which is a good thing. Kind of. Again, pros and cons with all this. If you notice here, this is valid for May 1st, and the general thinking is we're going to go into a moderate, almost borderline strong La Nina after we get through the heart of the hurricane season. So that's where the cons start to roll into it. At first, the CFS and our other Climo models were thinking we were going to deep dive rapidly and descend into a La Nina. We're still looking at killing off El Nino altogether by the time we get towards the back end of May and into early June. We will be in that neutral, if not neutral, cool pattern. Again, that is troublesome for a lot of people. It's not a good thing. Anywhere from El Nino and outside is only going to continue to get worse in terms of the Atlantic hurricane season. So this is the general thinking, and right now, on average, is this dashed line right here. It looks like we could peak our La Nina between the months of September, October, and November, and really level everything out between the months of October, November, and December. And I read a very interesting tidbit, and I believe I have it written down here somewhere, believe it or not, because notice the time of the year. Let's see, where do I have it? Here it is. I was reading another research paper earlier today and taking notes before this, and believe it or not, the season before a La Nina winter seems to favor East Coast United States landfalls. Stronger easterlies from Africa seem to guide storms on a more zonal path, and we typically see a more elongated subtropical high across the Atlantic. So pre-La Nina winter hurricane season, we tend to see, climatologically speaking, this is not me making this up. I didn't just randomly doodle this. This is from a research paper written by folks who study this stuff on a regular basis, and I can pull up the paper if you really need me to. Normally, the general consensus, on average, we see a statistical increase in the mean amount of storms that will impact the United States pre-La Nina winter season. So again, this is kind of why I'm doing this live stream. There are far too many variables out there that are staring us in the face, and we refuse to acknowledge them. So tonight we're going to be very bold. We're going to be very brash with what it is that we advertise. And as we get further and further into the live stream, you'll begin to notice that I'm going to make some very bold but confident statements, and that's why at the beginning of the stream I mentioned to folks on TikTok and on YouTube alike, if you do not like what I'm saying, if you want to round it out to, oh, he's fear-mongering, he's hyping, he's just trying to get the views, that's not what we're doing here. I'm being a meteorologist for all intents and purposes. Now, I'm going to caveat that and give you the disclaimer that as we move through the season, there are going to be mesoscale and synoptic scale features that we can't predict this far out. Cold fronts, shortwave troughs, changes in our sea surface temperature, localized changes in our sea surface temp and ocean heat content, tropical cyclones that are moving through that could possibly deviate upstream tropical cyclone paths. This is going to be a general preliminary forecast in every sense of the word. We're going to make sense of all the data that we have, and we're going to try to create as far out of a 30, 60, 90, 120-day forecast as we possibly can. It's not going to be full of hype. I'm not going to be telling you guys, this is scary, this freaks me out. No, that's not what we're here about. What I'm doing is I'm taking what I have in front of me, I'm compiling it up in my brain, and we're vocalizing it here on the stream for you guys to pull away and understand that these, on average, are going to be your time frames where you really need to pay close attention, pay even closer attention, and really get ready to batten down the hatches. So this is once again going to be our overall ENSO 3-4 anomalies, and this is going all the way to the beginning of the year. And notice that we have a cut and dried general takeaway that our anomalies out there could press into strong La Nina as we approach the end of fall, early winter time, with again the mean coming out and peaking at about a negative 1.6 to negative 1.7 degree Charlie La Nina. The problem with this, however, I want to bring to your attention is notice it's July and October, and we are still moving into a moderate to strong La Nina. The closer we stay to the negative 7 or the negative 0.7, and the negative 1.2 is going to be a weak to moderate La Nina. And what that means is we're going to be right in alignment in terms of our global patterns to drive a lot of storms, at least a generalized amount of storms, in a westerly direction. I'll show you the charts as well. I'll back that up with legitimate evidence towards the back end of this live stream as well. We'll talk about that. So let's continue. This chart brought chills to me when I looked at it this morning. I noticed that CPC finally issued a global tropics hazards outlook as of late last night, and we haven't seen one of these. I haven't looked at these since November. I even shared it on my Instagram page if you guys follow me on there. The last time I posted a GTHO, get the hell out, Global Tropics Hazards Outlook was back on November 7th. And I haven't since then because we haven't had our famous hatched red area. But if you take a look, May 15th to May 21st, the Pacific tropical season does start per the calendar on the 15th, and it looks like CPC is already highlighting we will start to see that early season development. So, and we'll also back that up as we go through the charts, as we go through the briefing. Now we're going to move into our Madden-Julian oscillation. The MJO is a very pertinent feature in the Atlantic hurricane season. Now, last year, and I'd mentioned this during my Instagram live earlier today, MJO is not an end-all be-all for the tropical Atlantic. Does it help influence the amount of development that we see? Yes, absolutely. It has been scientifically proven, and there have been case studies made and drawn out over lengths of time that have indicated that during specific phases of the MJO, we typically see more Pacific activity, we see more maritime activity, we see more Atlantic activity. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't have my notebook in front of me. It's behind me, and I'm not going to move away from the desk to bring that up. Between, I believe, phases 2 and 6, with the greatest being 3 to 5, is when our Atlantic will really start to heat up and we'll get even more exasperated upward vertical velocities. That was the kicker for last year. This year, MJO is not going to make much of a difference. I'll tell you that right now. And I know a lot of folks might be a little dumbfounded by that. Well, wait, last year everyone was talking the MJO and the gyre. We'll talk about the gyre as well. Problem with that is we were in a backwards hurricane season. And when I say that, we were in a hot pattern. We were in a hot ENSO. We were in El Nino. So when the MJO set itself up and that gyre kicked in and the planets aligned more or less, that's what spit out Idalia. That is what spit out Idalia late August and into early September. The planetary alignment, i.e. the MJO with the Central American gyre, Kelvin convective wave propagation, coupled with the hot ocean temperatures on the Pacific side of things, allowed our gyre to bring enough vorticity around to the Caribbean that spat Idalia right up in our direction. That's why she literally just slingshot over. I'm sure a lot of my long-term viewers on YouTube remember that. You remember my video where I'd mentioned and show you how the vorticity in the mid-levels was going to cross Central America and be put right underneath our anticyclone aloft thanks to the Central American gyre producing low pressure at the surface, rising air, and that's what helped spit her out due north and shot it right into the Big Bend of Florida. This year, I really don't think that's going to be the case. I really don't think the MJO is going to play as much of a role. In fact, it's only going to be more, it's going to be like a supplement. It's going to be the pre-workout to our overall workout, i.e. the tropical Atlantic, because all the MJO is going to do is just expedite our vertical velocities, increase our lowering pressures through the Caribbean, the eastern half, or the western half, of our main development region. And because we're already going to have rising air, we're going to have low pressure across the board. The MJO is not going to play as much of a role in development as it did last year, because last year we had everything working against the hurricane season. Idalia was the only thing that formed in the in the Caribbean. And if you guys recall, it wasn't until she escaped into the Gulf of Mexico where she really started to get her act together, because she was getting out of that El Nino outflow, that El Nino wind shear, and that downward forcing. That was the main reason why MJO was such a relevant factor last year, and we're still going to keep an eye on it, because as we go into those favorable zones stages this year, we're going to need to really pay close attention to all that area, the Caribbean, the lower Gulf of Mexico, the Bay of Campeche, and into the western tropical Atlantic just beyond the Lesser Antilles. I think it's only going to be a supplement. You're taking your protein already. For my weightlifters out there, you're taking your protein, you're getting your protein supplement in. Now let's add a little bit of creatine to it to get some extra hydration in the muscles. That's going to be our MJO. It's going to be the creatine to your protein supplementation. This is where we sit as of right now. This is going to be a recurring theme as we move through the hurricane season. Obviously, this is from 1st of May to June 10th. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I've been seeing a lot of folks, unfortunately, hyping and freaking people out on Facebook, on Instagram, that as the MJO moves into a favorable position at the late portions of May into June, if you guys look down here, notice that our MJO is going to be propagating across the Central Pacific, and we're going to start to see those upward vertical velocities and the anomalies start to go up as we get into the start of the calendar hurricane season, which is also why some folks are predicting as El Nino continues to crash, we could see some early season arrivals between the 18th to the 1st of June. Well, the 18th of May to the 1st of June. So we're going to be bringing this up on a recurring basis when we do our tropical updates to look at our MJO, Madden-Julian Oscillation propagation from Africa out over the Indian Ocean and through the Maritimes and across the Pacific, and try to get a feel for if this is going to line up appropriately with our hurricane season. All right, how's everybody doing? We're halfway, we're not halfway, excuse me. We're 30 minutes into the live stream. How are we doing, guys? I need to figure what's going on with this. I really want some water, and I don't want it to make obnoxious noises the entire time I'm sipping on it. There we go. That's better. Now, what we're looking at here, believe it or not, is not our current SSTs. Believe it or not, what I have pulled up here is more or less the rough time frame of where we are now up until about the start of hurricane season back in 2020. And the reason I have this up is obviously 2020 is the elephant in the room. A lot of folks are using that to compare this potential hurricane season. This is one of our number one analogs out there. And I'm so happy that I found this archive, because there's a number of things that really stare at me, that just kind of bug me, that just really... This is the one time I'm going to say it. Actually, I'm not even going to say it like that. I'm going to spin it differently. Has me very interested, we'll say, to see exactly what happens this hurricane season. So this is starting at the end of December, and notice we're coming out of our El Nino. Now we're into April, and notice the exact same pattern begins to happen as we go through April and then into May. So if there's any continuity here, any archival history that we can pull from this, it goes to show that our El Nino, our moderate to strong El Nino that occurred through this past winter into the spring, is more than likely going to be completely gone. Not getting there, not getting close. I'm saying completely gone as we get to the latter portions of May. By about the 10th to the 20th of May, El Nino is going to be a non-factor. He is going to be out of the picture. The little boy has left the building. And the reason I use this as a piece of continuity, even though this is 4 years ago, no, I'm not saying, I'm not going to pay attention. I'm not going to answer comments. We're going to derail it. So the reason I bring 2020 up is because not only does this serve as a really good piece of continuity from 4 years ago, but again, one of the biggest things I don't see a lot of meteorologists or even unofficial YouTube sources out there bringing up is pattern recognition. And the scary part about this is, and I'll even open it up, I'll put a larger view on it so you guys can get a better idea of it. Here we go. And then we'll expand it a little bit. The 4, if not 5 areas I'm looking at, number 1 is obviously our ENSO. Number 2, the anomalies in the southern North Atlantic, still on the northern hemisphere side. I'm also looking at our PDO, and the PDO is exactly the same as it is this year, that it was in 2020. I'm looking at our IOD, our Indian Ocean Dipole, exactly the same as it was in 2020 currently. And I'm also looking at the fact that we had colder subtropics and mid-latitudes at the same exact time frame in 2020. So this here, if we're going to find any continuity to help give a bit of a sanity check on our predictions for this hurricane season, I believe this is it. We have a lot of mimicking factors in our I keep saying American because I'm used to saying multi-model ensemble. Our Atlantic meridional mode was almost exactly the same as well in 2020 as we moved to the same time frames as we are currently now. You can see that the tropical Atlantic really started to warm up, and we actually saw a little bit of sea surface temperature cooling in the southern hemisphere component of it, which again, I believe only further instigated the amount of robust tropical action we had there. And in 2020, as we know, we had a lot of westerly moving systems. We had a tremendous amount of impacts. It was the number 1 hurricane season on record, and there's no arguing that. So again, before you guys start a verbal assault in the comments, I already saw one of them. And I'm not saying you're doing anything like that. What I'm saying is, before you guys assume that the point and the takeaway of this brief is 2020 all over again, that's not what I'm saying. I'm still in meteorology mode, and I'm investigating the puzzle pieces. And I find it very interesting that our entire pattern across the planet was very reminiscent of where we're going this year. And on top of that, we have even warmer temperatures in certain areas of the Atlantic, so that could be a catch-22 in terms of what the forecast and what the variables look like as we move through each month of the hurricane season. So this is the 2005 hurricane season that we have picked up right here. 2005 was one of the more historical years as well. Let me go ahead and zoom this out. I don't want to be that close. Why am I zooming in? Let me refresh and back out. Hold up. There we go. And one of the things I've noticed with these La Nina years, and I read this in the research paper as well, is we have a bigger margin of error in our storms that move west and our storms that recurve. With a neutral pattern, we tend to see it shrink a little bit. On neutral hurricane seasons, I've noticed that they don't move wide left or wide right. They go slightly left and slightly right. Whereas here, if you were to take 2 prevailing directions and highlight them, our recurvers did something like this, and our impacts did something like this. And I actually have another hurricane season shortly after this to help kind of supplement my theory here. This here is obviously 2020. So 2020, again, notice that we had a lot of MDR action and a lot of Caribbean action, and our 2 general pathways were like this. One, And then, unfortunately, not as many recurvature storms. But notice this. I'll even highlight it in a different color. Notice this margin of error right here. I'm not sure if you guys can see that. Let me use a different color so you can see. Notice this margin of error here. I've noticed that the stronger La Nina years, we have either extreme boomerang back to sea or extreme westward pushes, to where we see little activity on the east coast of Florida and more of a potential on our west and south portions of the peninsula, and our Gulf coastline is essentially like a fish in a barrel. So, again, if we keep our La Nina in the weak to moderate range, we're going to have to watch very closely on either side of the Florida peninsula. The mid-Atlantic coast is going to be under the gun. From Louisiana eastward, you're going to be under the gun as well. I don't know if we're going to see too much Texas activity until our La Nina can really build in a little bit further. Now, this is everyone's favorite hurricane season, at least my personal favorite. This is 2004. And notice that we had a couple of recurvers early on in the season, but then general takeaway, notice how our margin of error has suddenly shrunk. We just have one giant area of path, west-northwest. Florida got absolutely demolished this hurricane season. And just like I had gotten through saying, during our stronger La Nina years, we typically see a bit more of a westward bias in our hurricanes. Whereas if you notice here, during a neutral to a weak La Nina, coming out of an El Nino, I believe was 2004, how we just have a general consensus of landfalls right here. So, again, pattern recognition. We got to stop telling viewers that we don't know. Because to say we don't know, as a supposed subject matter expert, is an injustice. It's like a doctor. If you go to the doctor and ask for a prescription or a diagnosis and they say, yeah, I'm fairly confident it's this, but I really don't know, you're going to have your patient looking at you, then what the hell am I doing here? What am I paying you for? Why am I paying for expensive health insurance if you're just going to be like, nah, fam, I have no idea. So this here, I was going to look at a few of the different forecasts for our NAO, AAO, PNA, and AO, but I'm not going to delve into this because, truthfully, I'm not spun up on this just yet. I know a little bit about the Atlantic meridional mode and its impacts on the hurricane season, as well as our NAO, our North Atlantic Oscillation, but to tell you the truth, and I'm going to be bold, that's why I have this on here, I'm not going to delve into this because I have more homework and studying to do. So not going to spend too much time on this. I just wanted to bring this up because these are some of our other indices that we're going to be talking about, especially the NAO. There is a small correlation between hurricane intensity and track, depending on a positive or a negative NAO. And believe it or not, East Coast landfalls do see a very subtle uptick when we are in a more negative NAO and we have more of a meridional pattern in our northern Atlantic, I believe is what I have written down. Let me just sanity check. I wrote down a lot of information today, so bear with me. I just want to make sure that I'm giving you guys the right information. Yes. So negative typically equates to a blocking ridge set up over the North Atlantic. We're in a more favorable SST pattern currently with the hot Atlantic waters out on the western and southwestern or eastern side. Gosh, I keep mixing that up. The eastern side of the Atlantic and the tropical Atlantic on the eastern side as well, closer to Africa, are hotter. So this favors a much more dominating subtropical high height center and ridging over the central and eastern parts of the Atlantic. It creates a little bit more meridional flow, and there is no enormous correlation to landfall and intensity. Not an enormous. There's a noticeable difference, a subtle, maybe 5 to 10% increase in landfall projections as well as intensity when you're in a more negative NAO than you are a positive. But again, don't fact check me on that. I still have more research to do on that department. These are our SSTs currently, and I actually like this map here because it does a fantastic job of just coloring everything in and making it looking beautiful. The loop currents are going to be very, very detrimental to whatever Gulf of Mexico activity we have go on. Our Bay of Campeche, which was a definite source region last year, El Nino just kept us more in the low-pressure subtropical storm mode as opposed to actual tropical cyclone mode. But then notice just how much heat is out there over the tropics. And don't take this and, imagine that, well, actually, that's even a fallacy to say. This definitely can support tropical cyclone development. If you look at the key here, all these areas that are in the lighter orange to the darker orange and beyond are already well within the 26 to 27 degrees Celsius temperature range. So this area is already primed and ready to rock and roll for tropical development, and our Pacific is even hotter than that. So we are ready. It's just a matter of evacuating El Nino out, creating that prevailing trade wind direction out of the east, moving west, and bringing our ITCZ into that favorable position to start driving our storms off towards the west and getting some really good moisture and vorticity into the Caribbean. I'm still, once again, watching this quadrant specifically, since we're going to be setting up a weak to moderate La Nina during the first half of the hurricane season, going into a stronger one. Statistically, it has been proven that we tend to see about 0.75 more storms develop, which I know obviously is below 1. I'm not going to round up. Whatever. I'll just round up. We typically tend to see at least one additional storm or two per full-length hurricane season in 180 days that it is on the calendar develop between these latitude lines here. So about we'll say the negative 75. It's more accurately the negative 70 to the negative 50, but these longitude lines right in through here are typically where we start to see a subtle increase in the frequency of our cyclone development. This is our ocean heat content, which is another big factor that a lot of folks are worried about. So Deciphering Weather on YouTube is an excellent resource if you haven't taken a look at his stuff. A phenomenal tropical analyst, definitely picking ideas and theorizing alongside some of the material. I watch him brief, and I absolutely agree with the fact that I would almost argue that ocean heat content is more I would say, deterministic of our tropical cyclone intensity and frequency than just the sea surface temps. Because if you have extremely hot sea surface temperatures, again, the name surface, as soon as one cyclone goes over that area, disturbs the water, upwells what's underneath it, and takes all that latent heat and throws it into its thunderstorm activity, you're going to be left with very cool anomalies. So in essence, if we don't have the OHC, we will shut down the hurricane season almost altogether if we get one or two really big storms right over top where those hot SSTs are. So this is another piece of the puzzle, and I would argue that this is almost a bigger piece of the puzzle because our ocean heat content below the surface is what's going to come up after those storms come through. So if you really want to make a case that we're going to have an aggressive hurricane season, we need to be looking at subsurface temps just as much as a lot of folks out there are obsessing over our sea surface temps. You can have really hot water at the surface, but if you got cold water underneath, then nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to happen. So we have OHC that is already really getting up there across the Caribbean, across the western half of the MDR. And again, this supports my theory of why I want us to watch in this general quadrant for a lot of our more aggressive and potentially impactful cyclone development to take place. If we have stuff forming just to the west or the east, I keep butchering that. If we have stuff forming to the east of our Cabos off the Horn of Africa, they have a greater chance of missing our Lesser Antilles and finding that escape route out to sea. Because think about it. On average, if we have development out over here or within these two grid boxes that I have drawn, 9 times out of 10, unless they are rapidly accelerating off to the west at 20 to 25 miles an hour, in which case that's already harmful to their internal structure, they're going to intensify. They could possibly rapidly intensify, and we're going to have system after system, small feature after small feature coming off of North America that's going to disturb the pattern out here, and they will find that path of least resistance and escape out. Not every storm is going to travel west. Not every storm is going to escape this year, but I'm telling you that those are the intra-season variables that we cannot predict this far out. But notice how our ocean heat content is greatest right in through here. And if a storm develops in this quadrant or in this quadrant, God forbid, you're only going to be able to miss by so much. Unless something just automatically moves north, which just never really happens, you're going to either get a close shave in the Lesser Antilles a la Tropical Storm Philippe, Hurricane Tammy last year, or you're going to plow right through like a Brett or a Cindy and actually keep going and develop even further without that El Nino being a detriment. This here is going to be the depth of our 26-degree isotherm. Now, this is also another wonderful tool that I just recently discovered that's very important because you need 26 degrees Charlie, if not more than that, to support tropical genesis, tropical development, tropical intensification. And this is now the depth that heat is beneath the surface. Again, sea surface temps are outstanding. We can scare people. Look at how red this is. That's terrifying. But what's going on underneath the ocean is almost just as important, if not just a little bit more important. And this is how deep your 26-degree isotherm goes. So as that comes up, you're only recycling that hot water. So storm after storm after storm after storm would have to go through to wash that out altogether. And as of right now, in that same general source region that I'm really going to be investigating quite a bit from the start to the very end, if not beyond the end of hurricane season, is this part of the Atlantic, this part of the Caribbean. And notice how we have values of that 26 degrees Celsius isotherm beyond 100 to 125, almost approaching that 140 meter depth. That's a lot of ocean. That's deep. We will start to undergo severe compression due to the pressure underneath the water at about, I want to say, 50 or so meters. The human body could not go as far down as that ocean water there unless you're in some kind of a submersible vessel. Obviously, you know what I'm trying to say here. This hot water goes way down, and that is actually a result of the lackluster impact season we had last year. We had Adalia, sure. We had Franklin and Lee that came up, Nigel in hot pursuit. But notice that a lot of the areas that we typically see a lot of really bad activity during La Nina years was left untouched. We did not recycle this ocean heat content. We did not recycle this energy. That is one of the key pieces, one of the key components to tropical cyclones. They form here and move up like this. They have a natural tendency to follow the Coriolis effect and move up to the north. And I'm not drawing paths here. I'm just drawing what it is that they want to do in any part of the northern hemisphere. They want to go up and shoot out. It's just like when you're playing Call of Duty and you got to snipe a person from 100 yards away. You got to take wind and Coriolis into effect. Almost like the same principle. You shoot the bullet and you have to accommodate for the fact that the wind is going to take it and the Coriolis force of the Earth's rotation is going to move it as well. Same principle here. As those storms pick up even more velocity in their circulation, they're going to try to spin up and to the right. If you shift to another perspective, if you shift this horizontal to a vertical perspective, all you're doing is moving to the right. And that's why there's some people who are thinking that if we have very strong hurricanes, they're going to move to the right immediately. There's another caveat to that. If you have a wall in front of you, or like I said earlier with our door example, they're not going to be able to just bust through the door and keep going. That's not how it works. So that's why, as crappy as it was for me to say this last year, I did a few times in my live streams and in my videos say, I really want us to get a major system through the Atlantic, through the Caribbean to clean up all that hot water, because if not, it's going to be left over for something even worse to end up hitting. So that's another problem that we need to watch for, and as the ocean gets even hotter, again, we'll talk sun angle here in a little bit. As the ocean gets hotter, we're going to see the OHC go up. Last year, we had a lot of OHC in areas that were just left untouched by the hurricane season. Everything last year kind of did this. This was the 2023 hurricane season in a nutshell. We had some close calls for a couple of our islands out there in the Leeward Islands, Antigua, Barbuda. We saw some of them try to get a close run on the U.S. British Virgin Islands. We saw some pretty intense flooding in the Windward Islands as well, but we never saw anything extremely impactful plow through. Brett, even, I'd argue, even though it was a direct hit, wasn't the most organized system. Lots of flooding and elevated winds. Now, this is where we stand currently. Let's take a look at our anomalies. And again, I bring this up because if I go back in time and look at this again, and you watch this loop through ever so slightly, and I pass back to this, almost the exact same setup. Here's our cold content, cold ocean content is what I'll call it instead of heat content, surfacing in the equatorial Pacific. There's our cold subtropics and mid-latitudes. There's our hot northern hemisphere Atlantic, and even the southern hemisphere. We're about equal in terms of our AMM out there. And then notice that our PDO is still in a negative fashion as well. We have that cold horseshoe off the east or the west. I'm glad this isn't a drinking game. How many times I butcher west and east. Off the west coast of the United States, the west coast of Canada, British Columbia, we have our cold anomalies and our hot anomalies off the east coast of Asia. So everything is... Oh, and then again, look at the Indian Ocean dipole. We have our cooler anomalies down towards the maritime continents, maritime islands, and our hottest temps just off the east coast of Africa. I got it right that time. So a very similar pattern here, and this is going to continue to unfold as we go over through May. I do believe we're going to see even more cool anomalies popping up in the equatorial Pacific, so that is definitely not a good sign. It's just going to continue to wash away our El Nino. We're going to be left with a cool neutral and eventually investing time into building a La Nina as we go through July, August, and September. I almost sipped on my water and I didn't have the thing up. Now, this is what everybody was here for. This is what everybody wanted to join the live stream for. We're going to look at our latest climatology information. This is our latest CANSIPs for 0Z on May 1st. And as you can see, on May 1st, we're almost neck and neck with what's happening out there right now. The CANSIPs has almost everything nailed down to a T. Fairly uniform AMM out there over the Atlantic, our cool subtropics and mid-latitudes, that negative PDO, negative IOD, and the La Nina trying to spread through the equatorial Pacific. As you can see, as we move forward in time, this is June. I've noticed that a lot of our models want to keep these very hot SSTs over much of the tropical Atlantic. Whereas before, if we go back in time, we'll say to February 1st here on my birthday. Notice as we go through June, July, and then August, our SSTs tend to really diminish. This was an earlier run about 3 months ago. If I go back in time and fast forward to our May 1st, notice that May, June, July, and then August, we lose some of our eastern Atlantic, but our Caribbean really stays elevated, and it's a little bit more noticeable if I were zoomed in, not from this global perspective. But another thing I've noticed here, which is, I hate to use this terminology, I really do, because I don't want to sound scary or fear-monger-ish, but when you look at the history of these storms and the tracks, the fact that our CANSIPs is kind of dialing back our La Nina just a little bit tells me that our Caribbean islands, Florida, and the eastern side of our Gulf Coast states really need to pay attention June, July, August, and maybe the first half of September. May, June, July, August. Notice how our La Nina is not as intense. Again, we'll go back to February 1st. See that? See the difference here? Our La Nina has shrunk, and those cool anomalies have weakened just a little bit. Back in February, and I believe it was the same for March as well. Yeah, March had an even stronger La Nina as we entered the first periphery of the peak of the hurricane season. But then notice in April, shrinkage, May, shrinkage, and it takes a little bit longer. There you go. By October, we have a bona fide moderate La Nina, if not approaching that strong threshold you can see in our legend here on the right-hand side. So again, that further reinforces my gut feeling, my instinctual feeling that Florida is going to get hit again. Just like in 2004, we're going to have one, if not even more than one storm head towards the Florida Peninsula, head towards the Bahamas, coming through the Caribbean, just based on history and climatology. Our CANSIPs particularly thinks that our La Nina will not be as dominant in July or August as initially anticipated. It's actually looking like it could be more of a week 2 edging into moderate before finally September, and then especially October and on from there, we have a strong La Nina building in, which is a detriment to where our storms are going to track, because that also means we're going to have less of an influence on our prevailing trade winds, our dominant or prominent, I should say, steering patterns across the Atlantic. We're not going to have as much variability, because remember, we looked at the tracks, and in 2005 and 2020, because of the variability we saw thanks to our La Nina and other oscillations in different parts of the globes, when we have your westward storms, they're moving west. When you have your recurvers, they're recurving. When you have neutral-esque conditions out there, as the name implies, it's a level playing field. You're going to have some enhancement. You're going to have some tweaks. You're going to have some subtle twists and turns. You're not going to be doing full loop-de-loops and barrel rolls. You're going to have a more precise general track. Again, I'll bring us back to 2004. Notice how in 2004 we had 1, 2, 3 storms. We can say 4, I guess, that formed out there in the Atlantic. And just like we said a little earlier in the brief, they formed right off the Horn of Africa and they raced out. But notice that a large majority, you could just kind of nail them in to a general path right there. And that isn't a huge margin of error. Not a big margin of error at all. And I know PM is probably in the chat right now agreeing with me that a week 2 moderate La Nina is actually a little bit more detrimental to our landfalls than they are, or I should say keeping our landfalls at bay than they are trying to project a wide left or a wide right turn. Here's our CFS for the North Atlantic. And what we're actually going to look at here is something a little different. We haven't looked at this just yet. This is going to be our shear vectors and our 850, our mid to upper level flow. And the reason I bring this up as well, again, there's a lot of folks mentioning that we could see some early activity in the Caribbean, and there's a little bit of an indication here that that could be a potential off the northern portions of South America, right down in that general southern Caribbean where we saw a lot of our Vince anomalies trying to form up last year. As you take this through time, notice as early as July and then into August, look at how much of our easterly winds really pick up. And then we actually lose a little bit of our wind flow out there over where our Saharan air layer, our SAL, our Saharan dust, would be advecting through. So, and the reason I bring this up is because if you look at these red anomalies down here, this is also a bit of a detriment if we wanted to avoid an impactful hurricane season, because what this could suggest, and I use that loosely, this could suggest we'll have a bit of a lower latitude type MDR. Last year, if you guys recall, we had more of a 12 to 15 degree latitude developmental zone, is what I'll call it. I just coined that term. There's no official terminology. That's not official right there. It's just something I've come up with through studying. We had a general trend of westward moving waves staying at about that 12 to 15 degree threshold. Lee was a big one. Lee hovered around 12 to 13 degrees latitude consistently until he finally started to pick up momentum, really intensify, and then swooped north of our Lesser and Greater Antilles beyond that 15-degree latitude line. I remember going back and forth with a bunch of folks in Discord. I remember going back and forth with a bunch of folks in the chats, on Instagram, you name it. It definitely ended up moving that 12-ish degree latitude line due west and eventually started to move north. If we have more storms starting out at around the 10-degree latitude line, it's going to take them a little longer to find that path of least resistance and move north. And this would suggest that our easterly jet is going to be a little further to the south, which could also mean we will miss a large majority of our strongest Saharan dust pushes. Same thing as we move through September. It looks like our waves are going to be propagating just a little bit further to the south of our Cabo Verdes. They're still going to drift north. There's still going to be some northerly waves that are either going to wash out early on or they're going to move north. It's a guarantee. And then finally, as we get towards the closure of hurricane season, notice that things pick up back towards the homegrown area, our neck of the woods, and things begin to shut down in the Atlantic. And this is December now. This is going to be a look at our CanSIP's 0Z ensemble, or not ensemble, but our precip anomalies. And right there, all I had to do was click once, just as I highlighted on the European model. You click once and you go into June, and boom, there it is. And this goes neck and neck. Notice we have some really good model-to-model consistency. You see that right here? If I switch us back over to the CFS, and we go back towards June and July, see that right here? This, I believe, is June here, so let's go to June. Okay, let's go to July. We'll use July as a better example. Notice how our easterly jet, our moisture advection, continues to occur south of our Cabo Verdes and move up in this fashion. This lines up really well with what the CFS is predicting could be our prevailing easterly direction. Very well. And then this is July, you go into August, same song and dance. A lot of our stuff is predicting that our greatest moisture content is going to be, there we go. Our greatest moisture content is going to stay right over the hottest parts of the tropical Atlantic, and what I'm really interested to see is exactly what happens with these very anomalous values in the southern Caribbean, just to the south of Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. That seems to be our greatest moisture anomaly out there. And again, these are moisture anomalies, guys. This isn't overall tropical activity. If you guys remember, last year, one of the key components we had to look at all the time was that infamous 850 to 200 or 700 to 300 relative humidity, moisture content out there for these waves to spin up and really generate enough of that moisture to get entrained in their center of circulation and get that thunderstorm advection or that thunderstorm activity going. In this case, we're going to have plenty of it. So what the models are saying here is not that our tracks are going to be off in this direction, but more or less that the moisture is going to be in the most favorable areas of the tropical AOR to hasten our, oh wow, my live just got discontinued on TikTok. Oh well, that's fine. We'll go ahead and close this out. One moment, guys. I apologize. There we go. All right. Close that out. Now we're back with just TikTok. I mean, with just YouTube. So as you can see here, our greatest areas of potential tropical development are going to stay down towards the south. Our moisture is definitely going to be there. And this is why I do think that August and September, and even before that, we're going to have to keep our eyes peeled on the western side of our Atlantic tropical zone, if you want to use that terminology. And in September, it looks like we're starting to pick up more of that La Nina vibe. We're starting to see more hints that we could see recurvers in the month of September, some potential mid-Atlantic impacts, but then there's also still, again, a hint here that development inside the Caribbean is going to be off the rails. And when I say that, I don't mean just storm after storm after storm. I just mean it's going to be a night and day difference between last year. Last year, we saw no development in the Caribbean. This year, we're definitely going to see, I want to say, between 3 to 6, if not even more than that, developing inside the Caribbean and just bombarding somebody down there. And as we all know, our Caribbean friends don't really need a whole lot of an impact to cause very, very lethal influences to their weather. Flooding, landslides, mudslides, flash flooding especially are really, really bad conditions that can go on even with the most robust of tropical waves, let alone a tropical storm or a low-end hurricane. If we're talking anything major, that is catastrophic and disastrous. October and November suggest that we could have a lot of homegrown activity as well that could continue through before La Nina establishes her presence really well and we dry out across the southern United States. So my folks out there who are enjoying tornado season, getting their views, getting their subs, talking tornado outbreak every 5 minutes, crush it. Have fun with it because it's going to be dying and we're going to be on a totally opposite end of the spectrum this time next year. Well, sort of. I really got to figure out what happened with this. It was working just fine before this. Never mind. I'm reading the chat because there's a little bit of hubbub going on in there. Next up, we're going to look at our Canip's anomalies for the SST, and we'll just quickly go through this. Notice that our Atlantic really does not want to cool off, and this is also what I wanted to bring to you guys' attention, because I remember I had mentioned when we first started looking at SSTs, this is September, October, and November. See how our SSTs really quickly wash out and dissipate by the time we get towards the tail end of this year? And now if you go to May, see this? This is valid for the same time. I'm going to leave the chart as is. If I go back to March, we'll say, much cooler anomalies. If I go to May, we're still very hot out there, which could mean a continuation of the hurricane season. And this is another trend that we're slowly but surely picking up on. So, to be determined, our SSTs look like they're going to stay warm. And we're starting to see that pattern again and again on a repetitive basis with our Canips, with our CFS, and now I'm very curious to see what the Euro and the NMME have to say for themselves as we get closer to the second week of May. Those will be releasing here within the next 7 to 10 days. Here we're going to look at the prevailing steering pattern across the Atlantic, because this is another thing, too, that I've been seeing a lot of huge sources out there. Pages with hundreds, 200s, 500,000 followers and views on every one of their tropical videos. They're not highlighting this. And the pattern is not going to dramatically change to the point where this is suddenly going to, disappear. Notice as we go through our European ensembles, we do have some activity out there in the form of our baroclinic systems that just continue to charge through the United States. But what is something that you guys really notice, especially as we finally get into the latter parts of May, and we start to really increase our sun angle? I'll go ahead and draw it in for you guys, and then you guys can deliberate amongst yourselves in the chat. We start to finally see our baroclinic systems that are ejecting across the plains, creating our historic tornado outbreaks, as I like to call it, although I will admit they have been some very hellacious tornado instances out there, and I'm sure there's probably stuff ongoing right now, as a matter of fact, because our southern mode, our dry line mode, is probably going crazy in Texas and Oklahoma, yep. Not as much tornado coverage, thank God. We have a tornado warning in Kansas and a tornado warning in the uppermost portion of the Texas Panhandle headed towards the Oklahoma Panhandle, and it looks like our northern mode is getting ready to start going as that trough and low pressure eject out of the Rockies. But once this stuff starts to simmer down and we start to move away from our winter-spring pseudo kind of pattern, we're going to start to see less and less of those impactful low pressures and short waves coming off the coast to erode our predominant steering currents and our semi-permanent pressure systems over the Atlantic. And you'll see this even more so if I switch over to 850 millibar. Or actually, first off, I forgot. I have this backwards. So what we're looking at here are our European model or our European ensembles for the Pacific. And the reason I bring the Pacific into the picture is because I want to show you a little bit of the influence that our PDO, our Pacific Decadal Oscillation, has in store for us. Because of the fact that we're in a negative pattern right now, we have such hot anomalies off the eastern coast of Asia and Russia and to the south of our Aleutian Island chain in Alaska. Notice how, for the most part, we get our perturbations and we get our baroclinic systems that move through the pattern. But if you guys are picking up what I'm putting down, we have pretty good amounts of ridging that are prevailing over the North Pacific. And the reason I bring this up is, again, what goes up must come down. These Rossby waves and this hemispheric wave pattern has to transition and circulate the northern hemisphere. And because of the influence on our waters, if we have prevailing ridging across much of the Pacific, what that tells me is that over the United States, over North America, we're going to have more troughing more than likely over the West Coast. East Coast, we're going to be hot. I would not be surprised if we end up having really, really, really hot summer conditions for much of the late spring and early summertime here in the state of Florida and up the East Coast and especially the south, the southeast, the mid-Atlantic. So this is already something that our ensembles have been pinging on. Notice that even though we have, and this is what I was talking about for that intra-season variability, guys. Notice we have the low here, the low height center here. That's kind of destroying the jet, and it's becoming very diffuse. But all in all, if I were to make a case of where our continuous flow of jet activity was, it'd be like this. We have that dominating ridge out over the North Pacific, and then we immediately begin to trough out over the West Coast, which could also be why we're starting to see, or why we have been seeing, a crazy amount of recurring severe storm systems over the plains and up over the Midwest. That's probably not going to go anywhere, unfortunately, because of this dominant and persistent pattern over the North Pacific, the PDO, the way it's established itself, and it's steering our baroclinic systems in there. Now, I know this is as fundamental and as basic as it can get, but we're also going to look at our sun angle and why the ITCZ has not started to move up. There have been a few people who have mentioned that the intertropical convergence zone is coming up fast, and it's not really doing that. We're not there yet. Let's calm down a little bit. As we rotate into summer, this is what summer more or less looks like. We got that direct sun ray right over the equator, right over the tropics, and that's also what helps to create large amounts of temperature discontinuity, increase the velocities found within our African easterly jet that moves it off towards the west. That's also what's going to hopefully help to warm up our subtropics just a little bit, but what's really questionable is what the mid-latitudes are going to do, and we're also going to continue to see warming of our Gulf of Mexico. If I go back to that one chart, I believe it was here, those anomalies don't do it justice. We have a fairly warm Gulf of Mexico, especially with these loop currents busting in from out of the Caribbean and the Gulf Stream surging up the east coast of Florida. That has predominantly been why we've had a lot of Port St. Lucie and Stuart, Florida tornadoes during our El Nino winter, because of that enhancement right there scraping along the southeast coast of Florida. It's like a little miniature convergence zone, a little miniature sea breeze. As those storms flow through and you're getting that cold downdraft out of the storm itself, it's counteracted by our Gulf Stream waters, which is more or less acting it as like a barrier almost. And it's very difficult to describe, but it kind of helps that that energy bounce back and create those more robust updrafts and almost like supercellular activity, which is why we've had those tornadoes dropping. Because believe it or not, what helps rotation in a supercell and what helps stretch the vorticity out in the supercell is the very tiny microscale temperature gradients between your updraft, your hot updraft, your rear inflow, your outflow, your downdrafts on either side of the supercell. So that's what creates your vorticity elongation and gets your funnels going. Same concept here, just in a very weird scale. If you notice, if you get up towards the Space Coast or even further north to Daytona, Jacksonville, you've got the cooler temps. You're a little further away. You're segregated from our Gulf Stream. But right there near Port St. Lucie, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, just to the south of, what am I thinking of? Vero Beach. That's where you're right up against that temperature gradient, that thermally induced barrier is what I'm going to call it. So you have your cold outflows, you have your cold downdrafts trying to rain out from your thunderstorms, and that's going to help it to bounce back and create that bit of discontinuity and create a little bit more robust inflow to your thunderstorms and help produce those tornadoes. So we have hot water everywhere. It's definitely not going anywhere. And as we continue to oscillate into that summertime pattern, we're only going to see those waters get even hotter, which is the scary part. That's what everyone's worried about. Here is going to be our dust. So as you can see, our African easterly wave, notice, guys, as well, you can kind of see it as we go through our dust here. Again, ITCZ is down here. Our dust is up here. As we go through into the summer, our ITCZ is going to lift, and our dust is going to lift as well. And believe it or not, research has shown if you have tropical waves that propagate on the outer periphery of your Saharan dust layer. Remember how when we talked about those easterly jets and those easterly waves, how they have those pulses of convection, those bursts of convection. What your SAL can actually do, and this is a huge toss-up, I'm speculating again, this is theorizing. What your SAL can do for some of those easterly waves that are in a very favorable latitude line moving west is the Saharan dust layer can act like a dry line. I know that sounds really weird. David? The dry line causes our tornadoes out there in Texas. Well, hear me out. What our Saharan dust layer actually does in the atmosphere, obviously, it is dry it out. Duh, dry, dusty air is the lovely terminology we like to use every hurricane season. So, if you guys watch very closely, right along the border of our ITCZ, our area of moisture, and our Saharan dust layer, right where I have my hot pink drawn, and I'll move my head out of the way so you guys can see a little bit better, and we'll zoom in so you guys can see. I want you to watch that border between the SAL and where our ITCZ is. Obviously, it's just going to show up as black because there's no dust, there's no dry air. Notice how there's those weak perturbations, those weak little whispers, how it washes the dust out as it interacts, as that ITCZ tries to flood north. What that tells me is you have your dry line, and then you have your moisture. It's inverted. It's not like the gradients that we typically see with our eastern moving dry line over West Texas, western Oklahoma, interacting with our maritime tropical air and our moisture coming up out of the Gulf of Mexico. This is the opposite. It's the opposite direction. Because think about how the ITCZ works. It's an area of convergence. It's literally a sideways dry line, so to speak. When you have your dust layer there, it can actually help to intensify some of the convection because dry air is more dense than moist air, moist hot air. We have dry hot air on the north side. We have warm moist air on the south side. What do you need for tornadoes? Dry air, cool dry air, warm wet air. You see where I'm going with this? So it's actually been proven that sometimes you can see amplification of our tropical waves along the barrier, along the border of your SAL. So if you take this through to about the June-July timeframe, and our SAL is what I'll call it, moves up towards the north, and our waves kind of stay around that 10-degree latitude line, sure, we'll have some intrusion. We'll have some dry air intrusion, especially for those more amplified waves as they start to try to develop a center of circulation. That'll be detrimental because they're not the same as tornadoes, supercells, or baroclinic systems. That dry air intrusion to a tropical cyclone is not good. You don't want that. So if you have full-on intrusion of dry air in the mid to upper levels of your cyclone or your wave, that's going to hurt it. But if you get just enough, just a nice, I'm going to say it, if you get a nice little nudge from your Saharan dust layer and you increase north side convection, what does that do? As you develop that cyclonic curvature, you're going to wrap in that newfound moisture and you're going to deepen that cyclone and you're going to intensify it faster. So I'm not saying dry air is good. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is you can have a little bit of intensification on your north side convection brought on, very similar to what you see with that interaction between our dry line and the moist air over the southern plains, Dixie Alley. So, not in every instance, not even in most instances. In some instances, your SAL can kind of help you out as opposed to hurt you. Especially in this case, a lot of our models are thinking we're going to hover at around that 10-degree latitude line as opposed to moving further to the north. We'll start to see a move further to the north in September, but by then our SAL season, that intrusion of dry air is going to be nil to none at that point. I forgot Willow was in here still. So more on that to come. I mainly wanted to get on this because I've been seeing a lot of folks out there on Facebook, on social media, everywhere saying that, oh, there's going to be too much dry air, no hurricane season. And all I have to do is because every year we have Saharan dust. There's probably been Saharan dust since right after Pangea split. Like Saharan dust has always been there. Never has Saharan dust for any hurricane season shut it down to where there's no storms or nil to no storms. So I don't know why people are putting so much faith all of a sudden into this Saharan dust. Yes, there will be quite an extensive amount if we have a really good thermally induced low to the north side. Notice if you guys look right off, I'm pointing again. Let me draw it in. Watch where I have my circle drawn. If you guys look, there is a nice little high height center, a thermal low that's parked over Western Africa. And that right there is what helps to kind of regurgitate and circulate your dust. That's kind of what's helping to funnel it out. So it's going to be there, but the predominant months for Saharan dust outbreaks are going to be from June to early August. So by the time August really settles down and we can allow these waves to propagate off Africa, that's when the floodgates are going to open up and we're going to see anything's possible at that point. No, exactly, Super Charas. I will acknowledge that one comment because I don't know why some folks are saying that all the official sources out there predicting a hyperactive hurricane season are wrong. It's going to bust because of the dust. See what I did there? Bust because of the dust. It's never happened before. It's not going to happen now. And I can very commonly say that. I can very confidently say that. It's not going to do anything. It'll hurt some, and it'll help others. It's not going to stop it altogether. That's just never how it works. That's not how the Saharan dust works. It's just another one of those intra-season variables that we can't fully predict. I've actually been trying, too. I've been trying to dig real heavily into the science and the climatology behind our Saharan dust, but the deepest facts that I could find is our mesoscale convective systems, the MCCs, the MCSs out there that help to form our African waves, our tropical waves, are what helps to agitate the dust over the Sahara Desert and it gets pulled off. That's all I could find. I can't really find any rules of thumb or congruent information that comes to a generalized theory of look for this, check this, forecast this to get you an idea of what the dust is going to look like. Can't seem to find that. I'm going to continue to investigate it. Now, we're getting close to the end. So what we're going to do now for everybody in the chat, we're going to talk preparedness. Because a lot of the times, and I see this all the time, even for tornado season, don't be scared, be prepared. Don't get scared, be prepared. Well, what does prepared mean? On the screen here, I have our American Red Cross Hurricane Preparedness Checklist as a secondary source you can refer to if you need to. And there's a ton of other resources out there on FEMA, National Hurricane Center, National Weather Service for emergency weather preparedness steps to take. But I'm also going to go sequentially in order and talk a little bit about everything that I have here that I would like to put up into like an actual PowerPoint or something that I could try to disseminate to you guys. First and foremost, water. You want fresh water. You need drinking water. And God forbid the event your water goes out. The general ratio is you want 1 gallon per person per day. So if you know you have a bad storm headed your way and you're in a location that's more well off, like the state of Florida or a Gulf Coast location, etc., typically you can err on the side of caution that you want at least a couple gallons to your name, 2 to 4 max, because in today's day and age, Lord willing, emergency services will be back online and you'll be safe in a matter of days. For my folks out there in the Caribbean, you should be stockpiling a reservoir of fresh drinking water now. Definitely. You want to have more than just a couple days worth of water. You got to be very careful out there in the Caribbean because unfortunately, and I'm not saying you guys are just bad or impoverished. Obviously, there are some countries and some nations out there that are more second world, third world. But all in all, you definitely want to be everything that we're going to go over for my Caribbean nations, for my island nations, because you're waterlocked, you want to kind of double down on it. You want to kind of exponentially increase that a little bit. I also have here that I didn't see online very much. You want distilled water. Distilled water for the newborns. If you have children, if you have infants, you don't want to actually use mineralized or hard water for their formula. You want to use distilled water. It's better for them. It's better nutritiously for them. You also want distilled water to clean your things. You want to be able to still do dishes and clean things around the house or wherever it is that you may be sheltering in place. You also want distilled water. You can use your drinking water if you want. I recommend distilled water because you can just burn through it. You're not really using it for drinking. You can, but that's a whole other story in itself. More so to just keep yourself clean. You could also do what I like to call combat showers. We did this a lot in the Air Force, especially when we were deployed. If it comes down to it and water is cut out in your local area, if you got baby wipes or you got dude wipes or those other sanitary wipes that you can buy off the shelf in Walmart, Target, Publix, etc., I used to do combat showers. You're going to clean the sensitive areas on your body, wipe them down, and throw them away. Everything else, your face, your arms, your legs, can go a little bit before you really got to worry about cleaning up thoroughly. Hit the sensitive areas so you're not reeking to all living death and keep the train rolling. This is, an extra thing that you can keep in your toolkit. Then it goes without saying, for sanitation, sanitizer. Sanitizer's another one. Bug spray. Can't tell you how many times, and I remember vividly in 2004 even, the bugs were off the chain after Hurricane Charlie. After Hurricane Charlie, all your bugs are going to be displaced. Think about it. You're going to have rising water in areas that don't typically have rising water. You're going to have flooding. You're going to have animals displaced. You're going to have wasps' nests. You're going to have beehives. You're going to have the mud daubers. All these things are going to get knocked out. So you're going to have a lot of pissed off bugs, and you're going to have a lot of disease-carrying mosquitoes and other insects out there to worry about. So stock up on your bug spray for sure. You want eye and head protection just to be on the safe side. This is if you decide you're going to ride out a storm or if you're going to be in a place that could be hit harder and, let's say, God forbid, we're here in the state of Florida like Charlie, and you don't have to evacuate because you're in Central Florida, but you got a Hurricane Charlie barreling through, and it's not going to dissipate very fast. You want eye protection, you want head protection just in case something falls, glass shatters near you, or let's say glass shatters. You also don't want loose items in your house to go airborne and knock you upside the head or knock somebody out. Believe it or not, I actually have these here as an example. This is the eye pro I'm going to be using. I got these on my deployment in Kuwait. I'm going to be using this during hurricane season when I'm out there in the field because they got the water barrier on it, and it's got a nice field of view to where I'm not rocking small little water goggles or pool goggles. I'm going to be using these out there in the hurricanes when we're intercepting. We're gonna blast through. If not, we're gonna be here even longer. Several day supply of non-perishable food. I lived off of eggs and Spam after Hurricane Charlie. I had a lot of boiled eggs and Spam after Hurricane Charlie. Battery-powered lighting. When I say battery-powered lighting, it could be flashlights, it could be lanterns, I have a lot of little magnetized battery-powered LED lights in my garage that I used to work on cars and whatnot. You can have all those things just to keep ambient light in your house, in your local, or in your vicinity if you're outside, God forbid, or you're trying to clean up and you have no power. Lots of light, definitely. Just be careful because you're going to attract more bugs. Long sleeve clothing and pants. Again, going back to the bugs. You definitely want gloves. You definitely want boots. You want galoshes. You want rainproof everything. You want long sleeves up the yin-yang, especially for our Caribbean areas where really bad viral diseases can be transported by our insects out there. I know it's probably going to be very, very uncomfortable, But after a major hurricane or something along those lines, you typically get a period of cooling. You get a period of subsidence. So the weather is actually going to be quite nice for the first day or two after the event blows through. And that's when everything's really going to be agitated in terms of the wildlife. So you just got to suffer through the first 48 to 72 hours before those bad boys calm down. Electronic chargers. The reason I say electronic chargers is because right after that I have portable batteries and chargers, the ones that you can take on aircraft and charge them up. Make sure you have plenty of those on reserve. Something you can charge, something you can keep close to you to charge your phone, keep things alive for at least a period of time. If you can afford full-on generators or gas-powered, chargers, etc., things along those lines, power units, power to you. We're looking at investing in one here because I just really have that strong of a feeling this hurricane season we're going to need it. So if anything, I'll do a future segment out there when I'm shopping for one and give you guys the lowdown of what to look for. Walkie-talkies. I haven't seen this put out there at all, but let's say, for instance, you're in an area with relatives or families. I know a lot of folks, they tend to live right down the road from relatives. I have family who live 10 minutes down the street. If you have a really good long-range, I forget the frequency specifically, but if you have really good long-range walkie-talkies, think about it. You're not going to have cell service. You're not going to be able to call out to somebody over yonder and let them know what's going on. But if you guys are sheltering in place and you need a rapid means of communication, you could either use, like PM just said, either a low-frequency ham radio, a handset, or you can just use regular walkie-talkies with an extended range. Some, I do believe, can go up 5 to 10 miles nowadays. They've improved on that frequency range, that wavelength, pretty dramatically. Walkie-talkies are another good thing to have with you. Extra batteries, goes without saying. Duct tape, that is more of my civilian and my military bleeding together. God forbid you need to perform SABC, self-aid and buddy care. Duct tape, believe it or not, works as a great bandage. It's going to be painful as hell to take off after the fact, but if you've got like a hemorrhaging person there, God forbid you're doing search and rescue recovery, and you pull somebody out of the wreckage, and they're gushing, they're hemorrhaging blood, you ain't got nothing else out there besides duct tape, just wrap them up, and they're good to go. That duct tape is not going to let anything through. You can really apply good pressure. It's like a sticky tourniquet almost, more or less. And then obviously, if you want to secure certain things in flood conditions, batten down your house, batten down your windows, even though I know that's been proven to not be as efficient, so on and so forth. First aid kit, multiple as needed. First aid for your pets and animals. A whistle, something that you can use to make noise, to signal emergency services or emergency responders if need be, if it calls for it. You'll want to make sure you have additional medication, over-the-counter surplus of medications as needed, and physical cash. Physical cash. Your credit cards, your debit cards, your ATMs, your banks. If you're knocked out by a Hurricane Katrina, a Hurricane Ian, a Hurricane Maria, you're not going to have access to a bank. You're not going to have access to regular banking services. So you want some cold, hard cash on hand. Medications include, but not limited to, a how-to manual, perform self-aid and buddy care, SABC and CPR. I'd recommend somebody in your household learn how to perform SABC and CPR just in case. Tourniquet or a strap or a belt or something that can be turned into it. Sterilizer, sterile pads, band-aids, bandages, etc. Scissors, tweezers, sewing needles, antiseptic, extra soap, Clorox and Lysol wipes to disinfect, thermometer, sunscreen, definitely the big one for our Caribbean folks and us down here on the Gulf Coast and Southeast. Sunscreen's a big thing. Safety pins. The list keeps going. We got gloves, glasses, antacids, fiber, and laxatives. Now, I put this on here for a reason. Because, let's be honest, when we're nervous and we got a lot of stress, we're probably not using the restroom. So if you are feeling backed up, the last thing you need in the midst of a major hurricane disaster is to start seeing your blood toxicity levels going up because your liver and your kidneys are having a hard time filtering out all that nasty stuff. So yes, I'm losing viewers right now because they think I'm joking, but I'm not joking. During basic military training, there were a lot of examples of being in a high-stress environment to where people didn't go to the restroom for about 2 solid weeks, and they were just suffering. So yes, fiber and laxatives if need be, anti-diarrhea medication, cotton balls, and Q-tips are definitely things you want in your medicine cabinet and a surplus of. Have numbers to your county emergency management services, emergency management centers, EMS, evacuation sites, doctors and hospitals. Make sure you have a means of communicating with your loved ones, your neighbors, and know where your closest veterinarian hospital and emergency hospital for your animal care is. Make sure you have a clean, cut and dried location that you can take your animals, or even animals that you find in passing. That's another population, unfortunately, that just is kind of forgotten in the midst of a disaster. There are going to be a lot of animals that just unfortunately don't know better. You're going to have birds' nests that are wiped out. You're going to have homeless animals, strays that are displaced far beyond their familiar territory. There's going to be a lot of aggravated strays out there. You want to be ready to try to nurse and help who you can, regardless of if they're human being, animal, etc. I'm a big proponent for helping even insects. That's just how much of a lover I can be sometimes. I'll even help insects and try not to squash them immediately on first sight. I'll try to get them out of the house or avoid stepping on them. Same thing with lizards and frogs and whatnot. I'm not a big fan of just killing it because it's smaller than me. Again, moving into pets, you want extra pet food and purified water, water tablets for their water as well, just in case you run out of your own drinking water or you don't supplement enough of your own ratio of drinking water to give to your animals. Bring some purifying tablets, have them handy in the house so you can purify their water as well, make sure that they can hydrate. I recommend canned or dry food. Stock up on your dry food for your animals. And these are things that you can grab when you see a storm on the horizon. You don't need to just have these lingering around the house. These are things that, you know, if you see a storm in the immediate horizon 5 to 7 days out, look into grabbing some extra cat food, getting some extra canned goods that are not going to perish if you don't have power. Dry food definitely will hold. Canned food will definitely hold. Anything packed, definitely. A small grooming kit. Again, for those animals out there who just unfortunately don't know any better, there's going to be animals out there who are displaced. Feral cats, feral dogs, and or animals that may just happen to wander into your area. Don't just shoo them away. I mean, obviously, if they are fully feral, you don't want to go near them either, but I've come into contact with a lot of stray cats who just feel comfortable enough with approaching me. Bring them in. Take them in if you can. Have the means of doing so. A leash for your animals as well if needed. Make sure, again, we're almost done, I promise. Make sure that you have things like insurance cards, your medical records, your bank info, cards, debit or credit, social security card, birth certificates, any documents with PII, personally identifiable information. Secure those. Keys to your home, your vehicles, other assets. Service animal identification if you have service animals, your veterinarian records, proof of ownership of animals and other things in your household, medical prescription information, doctor's notes, pharmacy info. Have your power of attorney and your last will and testament on hand. Because seriously, guys, to us, to a lot of us who have never been through it before, it sounds silly. It sounds dorky. But let's say, for example, someone who was just hit by a tornado in Kansas. Houses were leveled. Do you really think that this stuff that I have laying around in here right now, if it's not secured, didn't just get ripped away and thrown into the wind, literally? So if you have a major disaster in effect coming at you, you want to secure these kind of things. And then last but not least, in terms of evacuations, before we get into last but not least, know your area. Become familiar with your major roadways, your back roads, your side streets, your neighborhoods, etc. Become familiarized with that stuff just in case you have to evacuate and find an escape route in a bad situation. Know where it is you can deviate your track. Excuse me, let's be honest. When mass hysteria hits because everybody wants to pay no attention because it's all hype and tomfoolery until there's something right outside of your coast, those major roadways, the interstates, the freeways, the toll roads are going to be so destroyed and backed up, you're not going to be able to get out. It's going to be a painful process. Know your back roads, know your escape routes, know the area inside and out. I even have written down here, we all love our GPS, we all love our Waze, we all love our Google Maps. Again, if your service is down, it ain't going to be working, so you might need to invest in a paper map, a paper gazette, a paper almanac, paper maps that you can buy still at your local gas stations, your visitor centers as you're going to and from states. You definitely want to have physical maps, paper maps in front of you just in case. And then last but not least, another forgotten item. If you have it, Ammunition. I have firearms in the house, and I will make sure that if there is a major hurricane on the way, to get a little extra ammo. And I say that as non-maliciously, as non-evil as possible. But let's be real here. Again, that's what the point of this long live stream is all about. Let's be real here. When these kinds of situations happen, it is more or less like The Purge, if you guys have seen that film. No, you're not going to hear you will hear sirens, but you're not going to hear the boom or anything like that. It's not like people are going to be out killing people, but let's be realistic. Looting, robberies, breaking and entering, property destruction, they're all going to see a rapid uptick. It happens with every disaster. There is more looting. There are more areas that are prone to crime and criminal and felony activity because they know that official emergency services are not going to be available. So, to tell you the truth, there was an instance, and Gabriel just brought up a point, 2004. There was a point in time where we had people in our neighborhood turning on each other because we were 5 days without power, without water. And there was a point in time where I thought my family was going to square up with another family. So, yeah, I want to have a means of self-defense just to be on the safe side. And not only for you and your loved ones, but in the event that you need to step in and help some people out, you want a means of rescue. You want a means of giving that bystander intervention. I know for certain, I know my neighbors on either side of my house. If it's, God forbid, a war-torn area post-hurricane, I'm going to support my neighbors. If I see Andres and his family here to my right being attacked or trying to be robbed, I'm stepping in and I'm locking and loading. Trained in firearms, trained in how to safely handle firearms, so I'm not afraid to step in. Literally a member of the armed forces, as the name implies, so I'm not going to be afraid to do it. So, again, I'm not saying it for malicious intent, malicious purposes, but if you have things in the house, keep them close to you. Even if you don't have firearms, keep something near to you that you can use to defend yourself. And this goes the same for animal and wildlife. If there are animals in the area, stray coyotes, stray dogs, feral animals that may carry rabies, you want a way to fend these things off because you don't want that kind of an issue to exasperate things. Most of our deaths in tropical cyclones happen after the fact. They don't happen during. The greatest threat during is the flooding. After the fact, it's all these other extraneous details. Insect disease, viruses, post-mortem injuries or post-injuries, post-storm injuries. Ineffectiveness in operating firearms and other emergency equipment. You want to learn how to use the machinery that you have in front of you. You don't want to go killing yourself after the fact because you don't know how to operate a chainsaw or a weed whacker. These are all real things. The National Hurricane Center at the conference I went to did say most of our fatalities with tropical cyclones, especially in the States, happen after the storm. They don't happen during. They happen after the fact. In our Caribbean, unfortunately, a lot more happen during because they're waterlocked. They're an island nation. You need to know when to escape and how to get out of that area if there's a storm coming at you. But in the States, it's been proven that after the storm is when most of our deaths occur. And it's sad to say that because we don't know SABC. We don't know proper CPR. We don't know how to properly handle items. We don't know how to properly take care of our homes. So you need to know how to work with that type of stuff. And before we open it up to questions, I have about a 15-minute window for questions. I'm going to leave you guys with this. This is our latest 12 Zulu European cyclone ensembles. You guys who have been on my channel for a long time are very familiar with this. And I'm going to leave you guys, before we open it up to questions, I'll leave you with this. So as we scroll through, notice that our Atlantic is fairly quiet, but the Pacific is starting to wake up. The Pacific, we have some anomalies out there. Oh, wait, whoops. My bad. I forgot I got to shrink this. Got to shrink it down. Yes, I know, mamas. It's after 9 o'clock. There we go. Our Pacific season is getting ready to come alive. We're going to start seeing tropical activity in the Pacific, and we're going to see Atlantic activity more than likely follow shortly after that. So that is how we're going to conclude this live stream. Pacific is getting ready to turn itself on. The Atlantic is going to be shortly thereafter. We're already starting to see signals that tropical development is likely in the Atlantic. And if I come over to let me see, where is pivotal weather? If I come over to pivotal weather and I pull up some of our forecast models, if we come over to the CFS has been doing a pretty decent job in showing us where our most likely severe weather activity is going to occur. If I pull up our CFS and we go through the forecast loop, we're already starting to see whispers of activity out there in the Caribbean. That Central American gyre and our MJO is getting ready to populate through. And notice how here, actually, look at that. Look at that. What in the heck is that? May 17th. May 17th. I don't think it's on any of our other charts just yet, but May 17th, this CFS model has been highlighting development right around May 17th for a couple days now. And this is getting a little close to comfort for our Cayman Islands, for South Florida and the Bahamas. Even after that, it looks like we're going to start to see activity in our Eastern Pacific and through the Caribbean even more so. And then look at that. Check that puppy out. CFS is thinking as we get into the beginning of June, our wave train is going to come alive. And we're going to start seeing stuff out there in the Caribbean. So not forecasting storms, not forecasting development, especially 700 hours out. But all I'm saying is it's coming. It's coming. And if our experts out there who are predicting a busy hurricane season are anywhere near accurate, then we're on borrowed time at this point before things start dropping. So with that being said, I'm going to move the chat over. I'm going to pop the chat out so I can pull it up and have it right in front of me right here so I can see you guys. And I'm going to open the floor up to questions. What do we got? Thank you, everybody, by the way, for being so attentive and for hanging out in this live stream. And again, as questions are rolling in, I only bring the CFS up and go through the CFS because the CFS is actually verified really well for what's happening right now. I remember back in the middle of April, we had Reed Timmer, we had Brian McNulty, we had other big storm chasers on X sharing the supercell parameters and the tornado parameters for the end of April into May, and it verified. It's been verifying. It's been doing a great job, the CFS. So that's the reason I bring it up. The CFS is highlighting the Pacific's going to go, and then shortly after that, we're going to have to put eyes on the Southern Caribbean and that very identifiable region of the Western MDR. And I agree. What's going on? Mamas, come here. Come here. Do you think this hurricane season will be record-breaking or similar to years like 2005? I will not confirm or deny how I feel about that, truthfully. The biggest thing, my concern is that could possibly be record-breaking are the amounts of storms that are rapidly intensifying. I believe that this hurricane season, not necessarily, and I know it looks like I'm talking into two mics now, I don't know. I really do think we're going to see a number of storms out there. I really do, especially once our El Nino wind shear fully quits, especially into June and July. I really do think we're going to see a lot of activity. I do think we'll see, and this is everything. I'm talking tropical waves, tropical depressions, tropical storms. Everything is on the table when it comes to overall activity. So it could push the envelope of trying to make history. But what I'm more concerned about, and what I'm going to be watching for and telling people through content, is watching for development. Development is going to be the big thing, and intensifying storms are going to be the big thing. Are you more concerned with rapid intensification this year compared to other years? Yes. That, Ann, is the question. Or if you guys have seen iRobot, that detective is the right question. That is the right question. I'm more concerned about our forecasts and our official folks nailing down intensity forecasts properly. because there have been a lot of times, especially with our more iconic storms, to where the forecast dropped the ball and we see overperformance of our tropical cyclones than underperformance. I've never really seen a tropical forecast for a developed storm. I'm not talking waves, because we obviously have seen, especially last year, we saw PTC 22 and all those other waves out there forecast to develop, and they never did. I'm talking named system or tropical depression that was forecast to intensify, not do it. I've never seen that. Normally, when we forecast intensification, we undersell it and the storm gets stronger than what's predicted. What is your forecast for this hurricane season? I was thinking between 21 to 23 named storms, because I'm looking at continuity. Last year was an El Nino year, and we had 20 plus our one unnamed storm in January. So if we saw that many storms last year in El Nino, there's no reason why we won't be able to get 21 plus this year. There's no reason. So that's what I'm thinking. And I can probably adjust that as we get closer. As we go through this month, I can probably adjust it and make a secondary prediction like a lot of our sources out there do. What is the chances of west coast of Florida getting a landfall around Tampa? I don't know, Judy, if I want to narrow down specifically to Tampa, but I would say west coast Florida seeing a landfall, especially in August, very high. Very high, to tell you the truth. I definitely think landfall for west coast Florida is almost through the roof this year, I feel, especially in August. I'm telling you, my instincts tell me that August is going to be the month for us. And not only that, but we have so many things happening in August personally. I've got a buddy of mine, Gabriel, if he's still in the chat. I got my best friend having his son in August. We have a ton of familial birthdays in August. We have, I could name so many different things. I think there's something else big happening in August that I've lost all of a sudden. I can't remember. There's another big thing in August, and I feel it. I feel August is going to be a pivotal month. August was intense. Last year we had Idalia in August, and in 2004 we had a bunch of storms in August. And I have to move my mouse because Willow's laying all over my desk. So while you guys are asking questions, I want to see what Kevin mentioned about the GFS ensembles. I want to see. So while you guys are popping in questions, I'm going to be looking in the background here at what our ensembles from the GFS are showing, because I do want to check that out if the GFS is hinting at something in the Caribbean. If that's the case, then prepare yourself, because we're probably going to start seeing those hype videos popping off. Oh, look at that. The GFS does have something forming up and pretty fast in the Pacific. I see it in the Pacific, that's for sure. I'm glad that I live in Augusta, Georgia. Don't really have to worry about hurricanes except for the heavy rains and the tornadoes. Yes, August is when the season gets going. If anything gets in the Gulf, it's basically going to hit Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama if it's huge. I agree. Florida definitely cannot be ruled out. I definitely do think if anything escapes into the Gulf, Florida is going to definitely be a situation or an area that needs to pay close. I mean, honestly, anytime anything escapes into the Gulf, from Texas all the way through to Florida, you need to be watching very, very closely. Very, very closely. Let's see here. Major mega fart cane incoming. Chances of Puerto Rico getting one storm or a hurricane. That's tough to nail down, Kevin, to tell you the truth, because Puerto Rico is such a small area that it would be so difficult to really nail down that type of a target. The chances of getting some close calls are very, very high this year. I do think we're going to have storms that are going to make a closer pass to Puerto Rico and our islands out there than we did last year. That's the big thing. That's my biggest takeaway. If you guys did not pay any attention to this live stream, did not care about the information that I presented, I would say, if anything, just be prepared for a very different hurricane season. Last year cannot come anywhere close to what could possibly be going on this year. In fact, let me show you guys this. This is an ensemble right here. I'm going to move my head out of the way. Look at how already our ensembles for the rest of the month of May already have this huge dominating high pressure out there. This is the GFS showing us a very, very robust Azores Bermuda high. That's a definite indicator of where things are likely to move around when they start to spin up in the Atlantic. Just wanted to throw that out there really quick. Chances of Georgia getting a hurricane or a storm. So the chances of Georgia, if you heard in the beginning of the brief, are actually fairly high, between a 75 and an 80% chance of seeing a hit. But when I say hit, I don't mean a direct landfall. I definitely feel more or less that we will possibly see... Oh, man, that's a familiar sight. Kevin, wow, yep. All right. You have my attention, Tropics. Going to have to change the intro of my videos again. Going to have to put back that hurricane, just like from last year when we started the channel. Check this out. The GEPS was what I was looking at for I diddly doo-dah, and there's a little something out there. Haven't seen that in several months. Oh, hey, look at that. As a matter of fact, look. CFS calling for about 16th, 17th May. We have our Canadian ensembles on board with May 16th and 17th. So we got a little bit of run-to-run and model-to-model consistency. So we have something to watch. Kevin, I think you did it for me. You won me over, buddy. This is it. Weather Center coming back full force. We're going to be doing our recurring tropical updates. I wanted to wait a little bit longer, but at this rate, it does not look like it's going to take it very long to get going. To get back to your question, though, to tell you the truth, for Georgia, chills, I really do think if you guys see a landfall in your area... Oh, wait, shoot, I was doing all that funny stuff, and I forgot that I'm off the screen right now. There we go. I think, truthfully, if we're going to get something in Georgia, what's going to end up happening is it'll be something like this, or something like this, or something like this. You're not going to get a direct punch in the face by a hurricane. I think it'll be a close call with some good surge on the coastlines and some possible tornadic activity, or it'll be something like this, to where it just comes up from the south and barrels through the area. That's really interesting. What does the EPS ensembles show? Do the EPS have anything on there? European ensembles pinging on a lot of possible activation out there in the Pacific. And again, guys, we can argue whether development is going to happen or not another day. What I really, really want us to pay close attention to is all three of our models. In fact, I'll do you guys that solid real quick. Let's do this. Let me see if I can fit them all onto one page. Please feel free to keep asking questions while I try to doodle this out real fast. All right, so these are valid for the exact same time, because one thing I like about tropical tidbits, and I'm going to move my head out of the way so you guys can see again, and I'll shrink the screen so they're all on the same page, all on the same screen. Let me move my head out of the way. What do you guys see at this specific timestamp that stands out most of all? I'll go ahead and draw it in while you guys are deliberating. Kevin, Pacific, yes, typically starts first. Usually we'll start to see activity right around the beginning, if not definitely the middle of May is when we'll get our preseason activity into the early season activity. But yes, how close are we? Excellent observation. This is, again, what I really want you guys to take away from this brief is the fact that we have the breadcrumbs already aligning. And this is only for May 17th. So like I said, I don't see why this pattern is suddenly going to become derailed, why this would suddenly shift. It's not going to suddenly shift. There's nothing coming over the next few months that are going to cause this whole predominant semi-permanent pattern to shift. And our models are already highlighting that most of our storms, like let's say this was August and we had wave, hypothetically, someone's getting hit in this pattern. Someone is getting hit because you're either going to do this, you're either going to do this, you're going to do this, or you're going to do this. There is none of this. That is not happening. They're moving west. They're getting too close to major land masses. Last year, if you guys recall, our Atlantic high pressure looked like this most of the time. It looked like a grape as opposed to this large watermelon-looking thing. What are your thoughts on La Nina this year? What do you think the La Nina... I think we're going to be in more of a high-end weak to a moderate La Nina, I believe. I think moderate is what's going to be prevailing across much of the Pacific for a larger majority of the hurricane season before we try to squeak into a strong. That is crazy to see, though, to tell you the truth. I'm not going to lie. I'm low-key getting excited. Not in a bad way or anything like that, but like, damn, I haven't seen this in a long time. There she is. Got some stuff forming up. Gonna have to start watching. Starting to watch. I'm gonna start bringing up some old charts. I am truthfully tired of talking severe weather. I'm ready for a welcome change, and tropics are my bread and butter. It's what started this channel. It's what welcomed in a lot of our viewers and a lot of our community members, so I'm ready. I'm definitely ready. Looks like we're already going to have to start our tropical updates. So you know what, guys? It looks like tomorrow morning. And you know, I'm torn between doing videos or live streams because truthfully, I'm noticing live streams are performing better on YouTube than videos. Like my most recent video, I was so excited to have done that, and that thing flopped. That thing just got destroyed. No views. People unsubscribed when I posted that video for some reason. So, I don't know. Maybe what I'll do is I'll start doing morning and evening live streams when my schedule prevails or my schedule allows. I might just do some live briefings and try to pepper in some videos there and there. You know, whatever gets the information out, truthfully. Chances of a long-term major hurricane, you mean like a long track? 110% that's going to happen. We're going to have a lot of good long track systems out there, I think. They're going to hold together possibly more than Lee and Franklin and Nigel did. So let's see. I think we might start doing more live updates than full videos. They're a little more low threat. I can pump them out a little bit more recurringly. So we'll see. I'm still debating on that. But, you know, it remains to be seen. But thank you all very, very much for fastening your seatbelts and sticking out with me for this live discussion, this very, very intensive live discussion. We went full on into everything that we know for the tropical season, and my eyes are going to be on the tropics. It's only May 1st, but there are indications here that I should probably start looking. Not probing, not hyping, none of that. Just simply investigating. There's signals here that show that there could possibly be some stuff on the horizon. I mean, even the CFS here is showing some stuff out there. I'm definitely very, very interested now to see what our Zero Z looks like. What did the Zero Z look like last night? I haven't even looked at Zero Z. Let's see, what did Zero Z have for us? Oh, look at that. CFS at Zero Z was calling for a landfall in West Florida. There we go. So the CFS, as we get closer to the month of June, is calling for some kind of low pressure to move up out of the Caribbean. It'll hit the Yucatan on this iteration and then blast through Florida. So again, because this is the CFS and should not be taken very, very realistically and very seriously with individual storm systems, what we're going to be looking at in terms of the CFS, the general takeaway is this area could become poised to produce some kind of a fast-moving homegrown system. So we'll need to start looking at that as we get towards the middle of May. Not out here broadcasting landfalls, or I just messed up my hair, broadcasting landfalls or anything along those lines, but the general takeaway, which Climo models are typically used for, the overall big picture is it seems like activity is on the horizon. GEPS, yes, it's fairly accurate. It has a proven track record that it can be trusted. It's not 100% always, on the ball, but it nailed Lee, it nailed Idalia, it nailed a lot of systems last year. The Canadian model and the ensembles of the Canadian model did fairly well last year. I would rank the Canadian model right up there with the European model. And there were even times where the Canadian model outperformed the European model. GFS, not a fan. Icon, great with development, not so good with the future thereafter. Ooh, I'm looking for Isaac. I'm definitely looking for Isaac. No, I agree. Yeah, there's a bunch of people on YouTube who do enough hyping. Definitely. A lot of it. That's why I tried to stay away from that territory as much as I could, but trying to be realistic with you guys. Everything that I produced tonight was not really self-generated. I did a lot of intense research, and I'm going to continue to research even after this live stream. But, all right, guys, I definitely need to cut the stream. We are 2 hours plus deep. I need to go eat something because I have not eaten, and I can hear my stomach growling like crazy. I know Willow wants her little snack, wherever you are. Yep, you're still here. Yep, I'll go get you your little snack. And, all right, guys, yep. So we're going to go ahead and end the stream. I think I just lost my... Oh, there it is. If you guys have any additional questions, comments, or concerns, what was the website used for the emergency plan? So I put a bunch of that stuff together in my own opinion on the paper, but there's also this redcross.org hurricane preparedness checklist as a secondary physical research or resource that you can look at. April Brooks, I can't tell you just yet because I have not seen one, but maybe this year we will see one on approach. Lord willing, in a safe manner. What's the chance of a Pacific storm crossing Mexico and hitting us? That's actually a greater likelihood than one would think. We actually had a lot of pieces of energy that broke off from storms last year that tried to move into the Gulf and do something, try to move into the Caribbean. Idalia was an example of that. Our dryer picked up vorticity that was in the East Pacific, moved it over Central America, and then she formed. But alrighty, folks, we're 7 minutes over the end of the question threshold. I do apologize if I missed your question. Please feel free to leave me a comment down below of this live stream and drop me a line on my Instagram or my TikTok. I will definitely get back to you with 100% certainty. I always get back and make it a point to everybody to reply and make sure to get you an answer as quickly and as efficiently as I can, pending, things going on in my personal life. But that's a whole other ball game in of itself. And wow, what a live stream. That was a long one. I'm definitely exhausted, but it was worth it. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys will pump this out and share this information with everybody and anybody who you think would benefit from it across the tropical spectrum. And we will continue to refine all this information as we move along, and we still have a couple of more pieces of model data to come out. We're going to see what the Euro and the NMME models say here in about a week's time. I think the 7th is when our Euro comes out, and then the NMME comes out shortly after that. So in about a week's time, we'll do another full-on live stream with forecast info. But be on the lookout. We're probably going to start our tropical updates, and I'm definitely going to have my eyes on everything now, looking at probabilities, cyclone ensembles. Before you get actual development, remember, ensembles first, then deterministic. Especially in the hurricane season, ensembles are your best friend. Once there's something out there, then you could lean a little bit more on your operational, your deterministic, physics-driven models. And I'm really low-key excited to see how the European artificial intelligence model does this year. So we'll also be able to take that for a test drive as we move through the hurricane season. Alrighty, All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's all she wrote. I'm going to abruptly end the stream. Otherwise, we'll keep talking until midnight as much as I want to. I'm going to save the energy for when it counts because it does seem like we're going to be on here talking quite a bit. So have a wonderful rest of your evening, guys. It is officially hump day, the end of hump day, and I hope we start Friday Eve on a high note, and we'll talk to you again very soon. Drop me a line on my TikTok and my Instagram, username Weather Center Nazario, like it is on the YouTube channel. But as always, until next time, this is Weather Center Nazario, signing out.